There was a time when Benfica was the pinnacle of European football, dethroning even the mighty Real Madrid club of the late 50s and early 60s and boasting football legends like Eusebio. But since then, Benfica has had a hard time reaching those dizzying heights. Whether you believe in curses or quite simply in the mismanagement of a football club, Benfica has been incapable of hitting those levels once again. One of the best academies in world football that has churned out some of football's most promising players of late, and in turn built up the finances of the club, a massive fan base that actively injects cash into the club's coffers through various membership programs, and yet their European form has been embarrassing for fans to watch in the last few years, and domestic performances are starting to slip as well. Hey, I'm Adrian and welcome to Rabona TV, and today we're going to go deep on Benfica and what's preventing them from being a strong team not just in Portugal, but in Europe again. This wasn't an easy one for me to make, so I'm very thankful that I have my friend Mario from Benfica After 90 to help me. Be sure to check those guys out as they have a live show in English following every single Benfica match, and he's a fellow Canadian. On top of that, Azeite de Benfiquista was a huge help as well. I've linked to them both below. We love the club, and we know that those who were elected to have the privilege of making decisions at this club are capable of doing much better for Benfica. And so in this video, we're going to look at the state of Benfica in the last couple of years, where we are now basically, the rise of our extremely divisive president, João Félix Vieira, or LFV as I'll call him, some of the good he's brought to the club via our now famous academy, and some of the controversies and reasons why the fan base is divided on him, selling our talent before they're even standing on 2 feet, election controversies, and much more. The last few seasons have been a wild ride for Benfica. They've established their academy as being one of the best in the world, and at times it looked as if they had struck a balance between the talent that they have brought in via transfers and talent that they have pulled from the academy. Under Jorge Jesus, Benfica made it to 2 consecutive Europa League finals, losing both, of course, but we won't be talking about any Bela Gutmann curses here. And from 2014 onward, they won 4 Primeira Liga titles consecutively, the Tetra, 2 under Jorge Jesus and 2 under Rui Vitória. But performances started to slip domestically after that, and it felt as if the players had stopped playing for Rui Vitória during the 2018-19 season. He smacked of a manager that had lost the dressing room, maybe lost some imagination tactically as well. Maybe he had, or maybe the change in approach from his replacement, Bruno Lage, was a breath of fresh air for the players. Upon his appointment, Lage that is, on January 3rd, 2019, Benfica was in 4th place. He went on to win every single match in the league, minus a 2-2 draw, and won the title by 2 points, scoring a ludicrous amount of goals along the way, including a 10-0 win over Nacional. Of course, João Félix was a large part of Benfica's success going forward, lifting the career of the extremely inconsistent Swiss striker Haris Seferovic to heights he had never reached before, and to this point in his career has never reached again. And so the loss of João Félix to Atletico Madrid was undoubtedly a blow, but the optimism and hype surrounding Benfica's new coach, Bruno Lage, Portuguese Manager of the Year for 2019, was hard to keep down. But similarly to how things stopped working for Rui Vitória, it felt as if suddenly Lage had lost the dressing room during the 2019-20 season, not even lasting until the end of the season. We've heard about this notion of player power at other clubs, where players stop playing for the manager at hand, holding out until they get the sack, basically. There were allegations hurled towards a core of senior players at the club, Pizzi, Rafa, and Andre Almeida being the most notable, with allegations that they ruled the roost, so to speak, and that the dressing room was toxic, which forced public responses from the players. It's always easier to sack a manager than it is to fire an entire squad. Tale as old as time, correct? Vitória had brief success until he was gone. Lage was the same story, so how do you stop the bleed? How do you stop the cycle from repeating?
Luis Vieira, and the joke I always have is the guy's more interested in playing Candy Crush in the stands than he is watching a game, right? He's a business guy. That's his thing. He's not like, you always see him, and if you see him looking at a game, he's doing one of these. Like, he's just like, all right, fine.
Glasses
and then
down on
his
his nose.
Yeah, and he looks always most sit on his phone or things, and whatever, man. And he's a business guy. That's what he's always been known, and that's what he was hired for. Player power takes hold when you have a lack of strength on the leadership side. So you have a president that's very disconnected, and you had directors at the club that used to be more involved that either retired or left. Like Shell was a legendary player for the club in the sense of someone that was admired by the fans and respected by the club and worked on the bench a lot, he retired. You kind of go through a few other names that used to be around the club that just went away in recent years. I think that was the hope of me hiring George Jesus, was rein that in to an extent, and even bring Luizão back on the bench.
Well, bringing back Jorge Jesus brought a lot of optimism back to the club, as well as a lot of investment into the squad. Kind of, when you factor in the sale of Ruben Dias. The first major failure was losing to PAOK in the Champions League qualifying phase, a team that went on to lose against Krasnodar. Fine, early in Jesus' return to Benfica, we'll give him the benefit of the doubt there, but things have been just as bad domestically. Benfica sit in 4th at the time of recording this video, having 1 win in their last 5 Primeira Liga matches. They were eliminated from the League Cup at the semi-final stage, and they were a bit unconvincing in their Europa League group, finishing 2nd. They didn't lose a match, but it wasn't all that convincing. No doubt Jorge Jesus' second stint is off to a bad start, especially considering the lofty expectations following his Copa Libertadores and league success with Flamengo in Brazil. But he's not the only one to blame. 2020 was an election year for Benfica, and Luís Filipe Vieira definitely falls into the category of one of those football club presidents that is divisive amongst the fan base. We'll get into what was a toxic, divisive election year, but for now, let's look at his rise at Benfica and why he somehow has so much support and calls for him to leave the club in equal measure. A quick background on Luís Filipe Vieira, or LFV, Benfica's president of going on 18 years now. He's a businessman who first found success in the tire industry in Portugal before moving on to construction in the 1980s and later on in the 21st century still having a hand in the real estate sector in Portugal, and he ranks amongst one of Portugal's wealthiest people. He won the 2003 Benfica presidential election with a landslide 90% of the votes, and he inherited a club that was in crisis. First, there was João Félix Ruben Dias, who was elected in 1997, and his legacy was that of criminal charges for embezzling millions from Benfica and financial ruin at the club, as he left Benfica completely unstable financially and didn't win a single trophy. A nightmare, an absolute dark spot in Benfica's history. His laundry list of charges read out as embezzlement, document forgery, breach of trust, and money laundering. In 2005, he was struck from the books and expelled as a member of the club. He was succeeded by Manuel Vilarinho in 2000, another president without a single title to his name, before Luís Filipe Vieira took over in 2003. He inherited that team that was hurting financially, was embarrassed, and without a title since 1994. In that time, FC Porto had won 5 league titles consecutively. Boavista won a league title, and Sporting had won 2 in 3 seasons. On top of that, in 2003, Porto winning the UEFA Cup, another European title to put Benfica's European finals performances in the dirt even further. And then a year after LFV's election, Porto won the Champions League with Mourinho no less, the man that walked away from Benfica after a disagreement with Vilarinho. Coupled with financial hardships, the room was on fire around Benfica. But in the 2004-2005 season, the 10-season-long league title dry spell was snapped under LFV, reason enough to celebrate the president, and things started to build during the mid to late 2000s, but not exactly in the most admirable of ways in hindsight.
Several years back in the late 2000s, mid to late 2000s, Benfica was really struggling. We hadn't won many titles. We had just signed Jorge Jesus, but we didn't have finances. We didn't have the budget to compete, and the money game was just going way beyond us. Third-party ownership was still kind of a thing available. Kind of a smart idea, but the idea being, Benfica can sell all the rights to their players to this fund. They'll retain a tiny bit of ownership stake, but if you want to throw money into this fund, you can, and they'd buy other players with it. And that's when you had a period in time a few years ago where you had the shotgun approach. We're really signing like an obscene amount of players. If you decided to pair up with Benfica, you're an agent, a third-party owner, let's say, of a player, and you're like, I'll give David Luiz, because David Luiz was sold to the fund, Di Maria, think of your names, even Cardozo, but all of a sudden, thou shalt not sell a player unless it's for a profit. And so you're signing Sulaimanis and other guys, and so the club had to start getting creative of, let's not field the junior player, let's field this other guy that maybe he's not that great, but because he's part of the fund, at least we can give him minutes, and then we can flip them for a profit if we want to offload it. So it's a very messed up thing. FIFA actually stepped in, same with the European Parliament. Basically, it was to end the third-party ownership. It was more prominent in England with the whole West Ham United with Carlos Tevez and all that fun stuff, but that inadvertently then shut down the Benfica Stars Fund. That was like 2014, I think it ended around that time. After that ended, that's when shortly after Jorge Jesus left, and that's when Luis Vieira, also because the Benfica Stars Fund ended, came out and said, well, now we're going to focus purely on youth.
Benfica's academy, called Benfica Campus, is located in Seixal and was built from 2003 to 2005, a massive upgrade on what it used to be. LFE really putting his experience in the construction sector to work, and upon its completion, Benfica's new infrastructure to develop youth was boosted to a level it had never seen before. The big three clubs in Portugal have taken turns being at the top of the youth development wheel. Sporting had a long stint at the top with the likes of Figo, Ronaldo, Quaresma, and many others, all coming through the ranks. But most recently, Benfica's academy has been churning out the most high-profile talent in Portugal. A quick run-through of some of the names that have come through: Renato, Bernardo Silva, João Cancelo, Ruben Dias, and Ederson, who have all been picked up by Man City, Victor Lindelof, Gonçalo Guedes, André Gomes, Nelson Semedo, Danilo Pereira, who's currently with PSG, and many more. It's safe to say that the investment in Benfica Campus has paid off. Quite literally, actually, especially in the case of João Félix.
It's a lot of money. You can't deny it. And even then at that point, I'm like, okay, you've held on for that type of cash. That preceding year when he started selling other players, like when he sold Ruben Dias this year for well below the buyout, and we're supposedly sitting on a pile of cash, and that means clearly something's broken. Like, and it's all of a sudden it's no longer about building something with the youth.
And that's one of the main sticking points amongst Benfiquistas. What are we doing here? As mentioned by Mario, the focus after the Benfica Stars became a focus on the academy and building a European Benfica that would be sort of self-sustaining in a sense, thanks to their academy. I mean, many of us took this as Benfica building out a side that was predominantly made up of academy graduates, sort of back to the roots of football. And given the quality that was being produced, you would have excused us for dreaming of such. Here's a quote from Pedro Marques, who's the technical director of youth football at Benfica. Quote, "We are committed to helping them reach their dreams of becoming footballers, but we know that also the academy is here to generate value for the club. That value is playing minutes for our first team, because you don't have to invest in another player of the same quality." Unfortunately for Benfica supporters, the academy has gone from a bright hope for Benfica's sporting endeavors to becoming a cash cow for the club. If any player from the youth ranks begins to get some hype around him, you can bet he'll be sold quickly thanks to Benfica's strong ties with many agents, namely Jorge Mendes.
If Manchester City or a big club wants to pay 80, 100 million for a player, you can't fight that. That's fine. But you want to get every last minute out of these guys before they trigger a buyout. And I kind of believed, I did believe it from when Rui Vitória got hired as a manager after Jorge Jesus left. And we didn't reinforce the team after selling so many players that were mainly focused on youth like Nelson Semedo, Renato Sanches, and so many others that came through. You're like, you know what, we're trying. And at the end of the day, at the time when Renato Sanches was sold, it was a big ticket for a very young guy at the time. And it always feels like at the time, like when Bernardo Silva was sold, he was a player on loan that hadn't played at all for the club. It was a big ticket, to be honest. It's terrible in hindsight. But at least it kind of felt, okay, you know what, we're doing something right. And I think people quickly forget that, and they tend to kind of put down that stage of the team. We went to the knockouts of the Champions League for the quarterfinals in the round 16 during that time period. And so there was a feeling where we went back-to-back knockouts of the Champions League where we were doing it with some experienced players and some youth players. And I think if you did the right sprinkling of youth and then you take that money you make from selling a player in the Champions League and you reinvest, you could have, I don't know, there was a moment there where I believed it. I think now it almost feels like a fire sale because we're proactively taking B team players and youth players that have loads of promise and actively shopping them, like Dante sell to Bayern Munich and a few other guys. We're like, hey, this is an amazing kid. Wouldn't you like to have him? We'll give you him a cheap loan and we'll give you an option to buy. Like, feel him out. He might be great. And it's like, what the heck? If he is great, what did you just do, right?
I feel like last season, sorry to cut you off there, but last season in the Champions League, it seemed like that was the only goal of that entire Champions League campaign was to put out every single Tavares that we have, get them on the pitch and say, look at all these great young promising players that you can have for 25 million. And
it was.
What did it do to our campaign? Nothing. We flopped.
That's exactly it. I was joking throughout that whole time that it was like the shopping network. Anytime it was Champions League, it was like shopping network for Benfica. Here we go. All right, Wanda, what do we got next? We got another Tavares. You know, you had the three of them playing. I remember seeing kids playing the Champions League that had never played minutes for Benfica on the first team or barely seen the first team. It was so blatant that either the Europe wasn't a priority, which is insane because the money is insane. Like the fact is, this is where I get really perplexed is you put an earnest effort. I'm not expecting you guys to win the Champions League. We put an earnest effort and you make through, you get a few wins in the group stages, several millions you get just for the wins. You make it to the knockout stage. That's more than you'll ever make from winning Europa. Like it's just, there's just a certain monetary benefit. Plus the honest truth is if you make it to the quarterfinals, the value of your squad goes up and you'll still sell. Like I just don't understand. The logic to me is so flawed. I felt there was this rushed effort to sell, and I don't understand what's going on behind the scenes. But as soon as there's a kid that shows promise, I don't know if it's promises made to the kid, promises made to the agent, or what the commitments are, but all of a sudden it's rush him out, get him the airtime, and get the first ticket you can find, right?
These players, such as Ruben Dias and João Félix, at times become integral pieces to the Benfica puzzle. So not only are we losing important players, more often than not, there isn't great reinvestment back into the squad. Like in the case of selling Nelson Semedo to Barcelona, where the players that are brought in are a step down in quality from the youth players we had before, often because we work so closely with guys like Jorge Mendes, who uses Benfica as one of his many ports to ship players in and out. I've done a video on this in the past, but I don't even know how many transfers I've seen between Benfica and Valencia, or Benfica and Atletico Madrid, or Benfica and AS Monaco, all clubs that are frequented by Mendes' Just the Food agency. And you get the feeling that, in a sense, we've pigeonholed ourselves. It's a double-edged sword. We get higher values for our sales thanks to Jorge Mendes, but
sometimes you kind of wonder, oh, I'm doing you a favor, you do me a favor, and sometimes you kind of wonder, is the signings because it's right for the club or because you're doing a favor for Mendes? And man, I'll give him credit. What he's built is as an empire is insane, but it's also so highly toxic for the sport. Because you question why things are done. You also, if you ever get a manager or you get a club trying to go a different direction, it almost feels like you got to be careful because he could ruin you to an extent. And I have with Porto, actually. Porto used to deal with Mendes at one point. Yeah. And my understanding is they stopped, and so did all the transfers. All of a sudden Porto ran into submission. Now they still work with them to an extent, but I heard there's a lot of animosity that happened in recent years, and all of a sudden Porto went from a transfer machine in Europe and they just vanished very quickly on the transfer market. They're still there, but they're not anywhere to where they were a few years ago.
So we can absolutely give LFE credit for the investment, both in time and funds, to make Benfica's academy one of the best in Europe. But one, seeing these players in the first team for an extended period of time is a rarity. And two, the funds raised from these players, what benefit are we seeing from them? It gets crazier when you factor in all the other sales from the past decade. Just to jog your memory a bit about past Benfica players: João Félix, Ruben Dias, Ederson, Axel Witsel, Raul Jimenez, Nelson Semedo, Victor Lindelof, Renato Sanchez, Angel Di Maria, Fabio Contraão, Rodrigo, Gonçalo Guedes, Nemanja Matic, Enzo Perez, David Luiz, Luka Jovic, Ramirez, Jan Oblak, Bernardo Silva, João Cancelo. Benfica has made close to €1 billion in player sales alone. Where's it going? And so, just to reiterate, anyone who says that LFE has done nothing but harm Benfica probably has recency bias, snapping the title drought, establishing the academy, overseeing the Tetra, helping get Benfica's finances to a better place than they were before, as he is clearly an extremely gifted businessman. Admittedly, our finances have been affected greatly by the pandemic, like a lot of clubs, and salary cuts are around the corner, but the point still stands. But had he stepped away sometime during Benfica's league dominance from 2013 to 2017, he would have likely been remembered relatively fondly amongst Benfica supporters, and I guess from his point of view, why would he step away at that point? Especially as mentioned by Mario, the amount of revenue streams he has created for Benfica though many of them pull directly from the fans. Red Pass, Benfica's equivalent to a season ticket. Benfica Play, which is basically Benfica Netflix with content you could normally find on any other football team's YouTube channel. Plus the club membership to become a socio of the club and have voting rights, though that's existed for a while already. That wasn't a creation of his. And of course, Benfica TV. We'll get into that a little more later. 2020 was of course an election year for Benfica presidency, and it was without a doubt the most fragile LFV's popularity has been since taking over in 2003 with a landslide victory. The most legitimate contender to take down LFV was João Noronha Lopes, the former vice president for McDonald's of the Southern Europe region.
I've never seen a candidate run against Luis Vieira. Lopes, any town he went, you saw like ultras throwing flares, you saw crowds, hundreds of people every town he went. This is like, okay, anywhere Luis Vieira went, he got booed.
And yet, Vieira still won. Perhaps thanks in part to his use of the club's TV station, BTV, perhaps because he simply has more support than all the other news agencies and social media would have you believe. I'm not saying that Vieiristas don't exist, they absolutely do, but the commotion in favor of Lopes during this past vote was incredible. But anyway, BTV has become an interesting thing to take in.
I love the idea of BTV, but it's become a propaganda machine for him. It was built to be a voice of the fans, and all it is a voice for him, right? Like if someone affiliated with the club but outside of the club says something critical, BTV will either put someone on the air to denounce that person or to question their credibility.
One such person that questioned Benfica TV during the election was former Academy graduate Bernardo Silva, who simply asked that BTV have presidential candidate debates live on TV. Not a crazy request, right? They didn't really acknowledge him, they began slandering Bernardo, and the other presidential candidates were barely ever mentioned in the lead up to the vote. But LFV had an interview on the channel, of course, right around election time.
Now, a guy like a Bernardo Silva, if they don't air anything about him on BT, he's like a megastar from this club, and they won't say squat all about him because they know he's against this administration. And I'm shocked how many people eat that up. Like they go and they don't hear it. They refuse to acknowledge it. It's like, oh, everyone supports him. It's like, not really. There's a lot of players that have left that don't support him. There's a lot of people that don't support this guy. But if they only watch BTV and you've been taught to not believe any of the other news sources because all the other news sources support Sporting and Porto and so on, therefore you can only listen to this outlet. It's kind of a Fox News of Benfica. It's kind of scary that the direction it's gone in.
And so come election day, LFV won with about 62% of the votes, but the course of the night in which the votes were counted was very strange, to say the least. I don't know. It feels different than it did before.
Well, there's a lot of people. It sounds silly because it really parlays with what's been happening in the U.S. with the election and the calls of fraud and things of sort. And the example I'll give is he won by 62%. But it's very funny how the vote count was going a certain pace and the number of votes drastically escalated. It's the first time Benfica ever used a digital system. I believe the election, at least I hope the election was fair, and I believe it was. But the things that they did that fueled the animosity is, okay, so the ballots we picked up by clearly marked cars and uniformed individuals, and then the night of the election, everyone's thinking that Luis Vieira's out, he's lost. And unmarked cars with guys wearing jeans that didn't want to identify themselves showed up, taking these boxes and riding off into the night, and it happened at location after location. And the club wouldn't make a statement, and it was one of these things where it was kind of like, don't question the integrity of it, and no, we're not going to open those boxes, no, we're not going to count the votes, shut up, stop talking about it. And honestly, I hope to God it was legit, but to me, it left a feeling of distaste as if something was stolen.
We may never know what the true count was. Maybe it was as the digital system says it is. We won't know until they actually count the physical votes instead of just relying on what the system said. But the fact remains that despite the various controversies and embarrassments and millions that have gone missing and overall mismanagement of certain aspects of the club, Vieira still has support from certain sects. Why is that?
I think that the vote that he got this time around was a vote of fear. There is like a PTSD at this club, which goes back to the early 2000s, so it was Vieira. The guy mismanaged $1 million for personal use. And now you look at the club in the last few years and the millions that go unaccounted for. and are very unclear sometimes, and there's excuses for it and things of the sort, and you kind of sit there and go, there used to be a time at this club where if 100,000 or 500,000 or $1 million didn't add up, it was like all out war.
That fear of returning to the dark ages, as quoted by Mario, is enough to sway some of those who had the displeasure of living through them. Benfica has all of the ingredients to not just be a successful club, but a dominant one. The academy not only generates great talent that could be used within the squad, but the revenues that come from those player sales could be reinvested back into the club to improve it further. But that's not been the case. Hundreds of millions have been raised in player sales over the years. And what do we have to show for it? Where is the European Benfica that has been promised to us? Getting draws away to Standard Liège when, if the talent stuck around and the funds from those who didn't stick around was reinvested properly, a strong Benfica could be playing up against the Bayern Munichs and the Manchester Cities of the world instead. It's sad, because the infrastructure is there. The finances are there, mostly, pre-pandemic at least. The talent coming through the academy is amongst some of the elite in European football, but the European campaigns have been nothing short of embarrassing lately, while the fan base continues to become more and more divided, the crux of which being the man at the top. Honestly, Benfica and the soap opera that is Portuguese football and all of its corruption deserves a Netflix series of its own. But I hope that you enjoyed this somewhat brief but not so brief at all, look into Benfica, a club that is holding itself down from being a strong presence in European football. My name is Adrian. I just want to thank the guys who helped me out once again. That's Mario and Azeit the Benfiquista. I love you guys. And I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video. And if you enjoyed it, please drop a like, subscribe if you want more from Rabona TV, and take care of yourself. Ciao.